I'm Ethan, I'm 35, and my father tried to give my own house away to my brother as an early inheritance, right in front of me. Before I tell you how that led to me serving eviction notices to my entire family, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. The air in my parents' dining room was thick enough to cut with a knife. It was one of those heavy, antique oak tables, the kind that's supposed to represent family legacy and stability, passed down through generations. For me, at that moment, it felt like a chopping block, and I was the one about to be sacrificed. My father, Richard, stood at the head of it, a position he occupied in every aspect of our lives. His hands were clasped behind his back, a posture he adopted when he was about to issue a decree, not start a discussion. My mother, Eleanor, sat to his right, her expression a practiced mask of maternal concern that I knew could hide a will of iron. Opposite them sat my older brother, Leo, and his wife, Sophia. Leo was leaning back in his chair with a self-satisfied smirk that he didn't even bother to hide, looking for all the world like a king awaiting his coronation. My younger sister, Chloe, and her husband, Daniel, were perched nervously on their chairs, eyes darting between my father and me, like spectators at a gladiator match. And then there was me, quiet, watching, feeling the familiar chill of being the outsider in my own family. As you all know, my father began, his voice booming with an authority no one had ever dared to question. Your mother and I have been thinking about the future, about legacy, about making sure everyone is taken care of in this uncertain world. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. I knew this speech. It was the preamble to a decision that had already been made, a verdict rendered in a court where I was not allowed to present a defense. Leo, my father said, turning to my brother with a proud smile that lit up his entire face. You have a growing family, for beautiful children. You're a man of stature in the community. You need space, stability. Your mother and I have decided that it's time you moved into the main estate. He was talking about my house, the sprawling 6-bedroom mansion with the pool and the 3-acre garden that I'd painstakingly landscaped myself. The house I had lived in for 8 years. The house I paid for. Sophia gasped theatrically, placing a hand on Leo's arm. Oh, Richard, we don't know what to say. It's too much. Leo just nodded, that smug look deepening into one of pure triumph. Dad, that's incredibly generous. We'll make you proud. It's the perfect place for the family to gather for the holidays. My father then turned his gaze on me. There was no warmth in it, only the cold, hard glint of expectation. Ethan, your work is on the computer. You can do it from anywhere. We've arranged for the garage apartment to be prepared for you. It's a perfectly suitable space for one person. Very low maintenance. The garage apartment, 600 square feet above the smell of oil and old paint. He said it so casually, as if he were reassigning chores, as if my life was a puzzle piece he could just move to a less important part of the board. Chloe chimed in, her voice sharp with opportunism. And what about the penthouse, Dad? You know Daniel and I have been looking for a city place for networking. It would be perfect for my business. Of course, my father declared, waving a magnanimous hand. The penthouse will go to Chloe. It's better used for making connections than for whatever it is Ethan does there. The room was spinning. They were carving up my life, my assets, my hard-earned success, and handing them out like party favors. They had already planned the moving trucks. I could see it in their eyes. The decision was made. I was simply being informed of the verdict. My father looked at me, waiting for my compliance. For the quiet nod I had given him my entire life. But something inside me, a string that had been stretched taut for 8 long years, for a lifetime of being overlooked, finally snapped. Cleared my throat. The sound was small, but it cut through the celebratory murmurs like a gunshot. 7 pairs of eyes turned to me, and as I was about to speak, the world seemed to dissolve, pulling me back 8 years to the moment this whole charade truly began. The day I made a decision out of love that would ultimately pave the road to this very moment of betrayal. 8 years earlier, that same dining room table had been a battlefield of a different kind. It wasn't covered in polished silverware and fine china, but in piles of unpaid bills, ominous-looking foreclosure notices with red lettering, and letters from angry creditors. The 2008 financial crisis had hit our family like a hurricane, and my father's small but once successful construction business, built on handshake deals and bull-headed optimism, had been wiped out almost overnight. The world had changed, and he hadn't changed with it. I was 27 at the time, and the memory is seared into my brain. I walked in and saw my father, a man I'd always seen as an invincible titan, slumped over the table with his head in his hands. His broad shoulders were stooped in defeat. The booming voice was gone, replaced by a defeated whisper as he talked to my mother. My mother was trying to be strong, but her hands trembled as she brewed a pot of coffee she knew no one would drink. Leo was pacing back and forth in the living room, shouting into his phone at some banker who had long since stopped listening. Chloe was crying in a corner, not because of the family's impending ruin, but because she'd just been told she might have to sell the brand new car my parents had co-signed for. They were going to lose everything. The main house, the one my father had built and considered the crown jewel of his life's work, was weeks away from a sheriff's auction. Leo's starter home, bought at the peak of the market, was so far underwater he was drowning in negative equity. Chloe's fashionable townhouse was next. Even the small cabin by the lake, the place of all our best childhood memories, was on the chopping block. The family legacy was turning to dust before their eyes. A month before this crisis hit, I had sold my first software startup. It was a modest success by Silicon Valley standards, but for a 27-year-old who had lived on ramen and caffeine for 3 years, the payout of $4.5 million after taxes was a life-altering fortune. I hadn't told my family the exact amount. When they asked, I just said I'd done okay. In my family, Leo was the success story with his flashy sales job and charismatic personality. I was the computer nerd, the quiet one whose achievements were abstract, unreal to them. And honestly, I didn't want the attention. I didn't want them to see me as a walking ATM machine. I had seen how they treated money, as something to be spent, to be shown off. I treated it as a tool, as security. But seeing them broken like that, seeing the genuine terror in my mother's eyes and the crushing defeat on my father's face, I couldn't just stand by and watch. That night, I called my college friend, Ben Carter. Ben had gone on to become a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer with a mind like a steel trap. We met at a 24-hour diner, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and desperation. Felt fitting. They're going to lose it all, Ben, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I explained the whole situation, the foreclosure notices, the sheer scale of the debt. He took a slow sip of his coffee. It's happening to a lot of people, Ethan. It's a tough situation. There are options. They could declare bankruptcy, try to restructure. No, I said, shaking my head. Bankruptcy would destroy my father. His pride is all he has left. And Leo, he'd just find a new way to get into debt. I can fix it. I have the money. I can buy the properties. Ben put his cup down and looked at me, his eyes serious, analytical. You mean loan them the money? No, I said, my voice firm. That would never work. It would just be a temporary patch, and my father would see it as a handout. I mean, I want to buy them. All of them. The house, Leo's place, Chloe's, the cabin, the 6 rental units they depended on for their retirement income. I want to buy everything, quietly, before the bank takes them. Ben leaned forward, his legal mind whirring. Ethan, do you understand what you're suggesting? You'd be their landlord. Their secret landlord. This is a minefield. Legally, it's clean if we do it right. We set up a holding company, an LLC. It buys the properties out of foreclosure from the bank. As far as the world is concerned, some anonymous corporation saw a good investment. But emotionally, Ethan, I've seen situations like this before. Secrets in families are like time bombs. This could blow up in your face one day. What's the alternative? I asked, the desperation clear in my voice. Let them end up on the street? Let my father lose the house he poured his heart and soul into? This is the only way to do it without shattering his ego. They never have to know it's me. I'll own the properties, I'll pay the taxes and the insurance, and I'll let them live there, rent-free. They can get back on their feet, and I can protect the family assets. Ben sighed, rubbing his temples. You have a good heart, man. Too good, maybe. It makes you a good person, but it can make you a terrible client. Okay. If you're dead set on this, we do it by the book. We'll call the LLC Clearview Holdings. No paper trail leading back to you. I'll handle the transactions through a series of shell corporations. But I'm putting this on the record. I am advising you, as your lawyer, to have a formal agreement with them. A lease even for $1 a year. Something that establishes the legal reality of the situation. No, I insisted, my voice filled with a naive certainty. No agreements. It has to feel like they still own it. My father. It would crush him to know he's a tenant in his own home. This is about saving them, not controlling them. That was my mistake. My biggest, most naive mistake. I chose their feelings over the facts. I chose to be the silent savior, the invisible safety net. Alone in my apartment that night, I wired the funds to the escrow account Ben had set up. Watching millions of dollars leave my account felt less significant than the crushing weight of the secret I was taking on. Over the next few months, Ben worked his legal magic. Clearview Holdings LLC acquired 12 properties in a complex, multi-bank transaction. The foreclosure notices stopped. The angry phone calls ceased. My family thought some anonymous investor had bought their distressed debt and, for some strange, benevolent reason, wasn't kicking them out. They called it a miracle. My father, his confidence restored, claimed it was his shrewd negotiating that had convinced the new owners to be lenient. They held a massive party to celebrate their good luck. At that party, my father, holding a glass of champagne, clapped me on the back. See, son? Sometimes you just have to have faith. The world rewards those who work hard. I just smiled and nodded, the secret weighing on me like a physical object. For 8 years, I carried that weight. For 8 years, I was the silent, unacknowledged bedrock of their entire existence. I did it out of love, or so I told myself. But as I stood in that dining room, 8 years later, I realized that my silence hadn't bought love. It had only bought contempt. And the bomb Ben had warned me about was finally about to explode. Being the family's secret benefactor was like having a full-time, unpaid job where your only compensation was being taken for granted. Over those 8 years, the dynamic in my family didn't just reset to what it was before the crisis. It got worse. Their miraculous recovery, which was really just me silently bleeding money into their lives, inflated their egos to incredible new heights. They didn't learn from their mistakes. They were rewarded for them. I remember one Thanksgiving, about 5 years ago, which perfectly captures the absurdity of my situation. Leo rolled up in a brand new Range Rover, the kind with a 6-figure price tag. He tossed the keys onto the kitchen counter with a flourish, making sure everyone saw the logo. Just a little something to celebrate closing the Henderson deal, he announced to the room. Had to get a car that reflects the success. My father beamed, wrapping an arm around Leo's shoulders. That's my boy, always reaching for the top. A man's car. That's how you project power, Ethan. You should pay attention. He said it with a wink, as if he were letting me in on a secret to a world I couldn't possibly understand. Later that evening, feeling a small need to be seen, I mentioned that my consulting firm had just landed a massive contract with a German tech conglomerate. It was a deal that would secure my company's finances for the next decade, and was the culmination of a year of grueling work. It was a promotion for my company on the global stage. My father, busy carving the turkey, just waved a dismissive hand without looking up. That's nice, Ethan. All that computer stuff is very complicated. Just make sure you're saving for a real future. Bricks and mortar, son. That's what lasts. A real future. As if my multimillion-dollar company, with employees in 3 countries, was a lemonade stand. To them, my success was just numbers on a screen. It wasn't tangible like a luxury car or a designer suit. I wasn't just the computer nerd anymore. I was the weirdly solvent computer nerd whose success they didn't have to acknowledge because they couldn't understand it, and therefore, it didn't count in their world. My sister, Chloe, was even more direct. She saw my quiet, frugal lifestyle as a personal insult to her own materialistic values. I didn't buy flashy cars or designer clothes. I invested. I built. My wealth was quiet, working for me in the background. Hers was loud, worn on her sleeve, and financed by debt. "I don't get you, Ethan," she said to me once at a family barbecue, wrinkling her nose at my perfectly reliable but unimpressive sedan. "You make all this money from your internet thing, but you live like a grad student. It's embarrassing. People will think we're poor." "I'm comfortable," I'd said simply. "Comfortable," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Leo knows how to live. He understands that image is everything. That's how you get ahead." Image was everything, and I was invisible. I was the silent, steady foundation they built their lavish, imaginary lives on. They sent me the bills for major repairs, disguised as casual requests for help. It was a masterful manipulation. My mother would call. "Ethan, darling, the plumber was here. He said the main water heater at our house has finally given up the ghost. It's a $3,000 job. Can you imagine? What a terrible time for it to happen." And like a fool, I'd have my company cut a check to the contractor, and they'd cash it, assuming the anonymous, benevolent landlord was taking care of it. They never asked questions. They didn't want the answers. The final straw, the thing that made me realize this couldn't last, came about a month before the fateful family meeting. It was the call from my Uncle David. He's my dad's younger brother, a quiet, decent man who lived in one of the smaller rental properties I owned. He was a retired carpenter, a man who understood the value of an honest day's work, and he was the only one in the family who treated me with simple, straightforward respect. He called me late one night, his voice a low, worried whisper, the sound of a man who didn't like making trouble. "Ethan, it's your Uncle David. I'm sorry to call so late." "No problem, Uncle David. Is everything okay?" I was immediately on alert. He never called unless it was important. I don't know. I overheard your father talking to Leo the other day. I was dropping off some mail. The door was ajar. They didn't know I was there." He paused, and I could hear him take a shaky breath. "They were talking about the properties, about reallocating them. Richard was saying it was time for a proper inheritance plan. He said since the owner of these places has never shown his face in 8 years, the family should just take official control. He mentioned your house specifically. For Leo, he said, Leo's the future of this family's name. He needs the flagship property." A cold dread washed over me. What did he mean, take control? "I heard him mention a lawyer," David whispered. "Something about squatters' rights or adverse possession. He thinks if you've lived somewhere long enough without paying rent, you can claim it. This legal nonsense, of course, but your father, he hears what he wants to hear. He said something that chilled me, Ethan. He said, Ethan's got his computer money. He owes us this. It's his duty. They think your success is just a lucky break, and Leo's is the real deal. They're planning to cut you out completely. I thought you should know. Be careful." After I hung up, I just sat there in the dark for a long time. It wasn't just that they were ungrateful. It was that they were actively plotting to take from me what I had already given them. The sheer audacity, the profound entitlement of it was breathtaking. They hadn't just forgotten my sacrifice. They had erased it from history and written a new one where they were the rightful heirs and I was the selfish dragon hoarding gold they were entitled to. That's when I called Ben. My voice on the phone was unnaturally calm. "They're making a move," I said, without any preamble. There was a weary sigh on the other end of the line. "I told you this would happen," Ben said. It wasn't an "I told you so." It was the grim statement of a man whose worst predictions had come true. "What's your play?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted, "but I think it's time Clearview Holdings had a face." I asked Ben to draw up the paperwork. Contingency plans, eviction notices, for all 12 properties. I didn't know if I would use them. I hoped I wouldn't have to. I hoped my uncle had misheard. I hoped my family, for all their flaws, weren't capable of such a profound, calculated betrayal. But hope is a funny thing. It can keep you going, or it can blind you to the ugly truth right in front of your face. As I stood in that dining room, Listening to them give away my home, I realized I'd been blind for far too long. The notices Ben had prepared were no longer just a worst-case scenario. They were about to become an inevitability. I brought my focus back to the dining room, the expectant faces, the air of triumph. They were waiting for me to fold, to accept my demotion to the garage apartment with a quiet, wounded dignity. My father was already looking at Leo, a broad, satisfied smile on his face, as if the matter was already settled. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat too long. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to grow louder with each passing second. I looked directly at my father, my gaze unwavering. "You can't," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was not weak. It carried the weight of 8 years of secrets, and it cut through the celebratory atmosphere like a shard of ice. My father's smile vanished. His head snapped towards me. "What did you say to me?" His tone was one of pure disbelief, as if the furniture had just spoken. "You can't give this house to Leo," I repeated, my voice gaining strength as the adrenaline surged through me. "Just like you can't give the penthouse to Chloe. You can't give away what you don't own." A short, derisive laugh escaped from Leo. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table. "What are you talking about, little brother? Did you hit your head on the way in? This is the family home. It's been in the family for ages." "No, it isn't," I said, standing up slowly from my chair. My movements were measured, controlled. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind of clarity that comes when you've hit rock bottom and there's nowhere to go but up. This house, the one we are all sitting in, was purchased 8 years ago by a limited liability company. A company named Clearview Holdings. I let that name sink in. I saw a flicker of confusion in my father's eyes. He knew the name. It was the faceless entity on the property tax documents he'd occasionally seen, the ones he assumed were from some distant corporate landlord. "Leo, your house?" I continued, turning my gaze to my brother, whose smirk was beginning to look strained. "The one you just put that new deck on? Also owned by Clearview Holdings. Chloe, the townhouse you and Daniel live in? Same owner. The lake cabin, where we spent our summers. Same owner. The 6 rental units that provide the income you all thought was from Dad's investments. Including the one Uncle David lives in? All of them. Every single property this family occupies was bought out of foreclosure in 2008 by that same company." The silence in the room was now absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating thing. The smirks were gone, replaced by looks of stunned disbelief. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel, Chloe's husband, just stared at his plate as if it held the answers to the universe. My mother was the first to speak, her voice trembling, laced with a dawning horror. "Ethan, what is this? What are you trying to say? Is this some kind of joke?" I finally looked at her, and for the first time I didn't feel a pang of guilt or a need to protect her. I just felt a profound sadness for the truth she had refused to see. "I'm saying," I said, my voice as hard and clear as diamond, "that for 8 years, you haven't been living in your homes. You've been living in mine. I am Clearview Holdings. I started it with the money from my first company. I bought it all. I saved this family from bankruptcy and public humiliation, and you never even knew it because you never bothered to look past your own assumptions. You were too busy looking down on me." The explosion was instantaneous. "That's a lie," my father roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He slammed his fist on the antique oak table, making the silverware jump and a water glass tremble. "You're a liar. You think you can come in here with some fairy tale and claim my house? The house I built with my own 2 hands. You built it, Dad, but you lost it," I said calmly, refusing to be baited into a shouting match. "The bank was going to take it. The auction date was set. I stepped in and bought it before they could. I have the paperwork to prove it." Leo shot up from his chair, his face contorted with rage and confusion. "You're insane. You've been planning this? Some kind of sick, twisted power trip? You let us believe for 8 years that everything was fine, just so you could pull the rug out from under us. I let you believe that because I thought it was the kind thing to do. My voice finally rose, laced with the frustration I'd swallowed for nearly a decade. I paid the bills. I paid the taxes. I paid for the new roof over your head. Dad, when that storm hit, I paid for the new furnace at your house. Leo, when yours died in the middle of winter, I did it all so you wouldn't have to face the humiliation. I did it because I loved you, but I see now that was a mistake. You don't respect what's given. You only respect what you can take. Chloe started to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage, of a spoiled child having her favorite toy threatened. So this is what this is about? You want to thank you? After all these years, you pull this stunt because you feel unappreciated? How could you be so cruel and vindictive? Cruel. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. They had just tried to render me homeless, to take the fruits of my labor and distribute them among themselves like feudal lords dividing up conquered land. And I was the cruel one. This isn't about appreciation anymore, I said, my voice dropping back to a cold, level tone that seemed to chill the room. This is about facts. And the fact is, you are all living on my property under my charity. And this meeting about my inheritance is officially over. I turned and walked towards the grand foyer, my back straight. Each step felt like a mile. You walk out that door, you are no longer a part of this family. My father bellowed after me, his voice cracking with fury. I stopped at the threshold, my hand on the heavy oak door. I looked back at him, at all of them, their faces a grotesque mask of fury, disbelief, and fear. Dad, I said, and my voice was hollow, empty of the warmth it once held for them. You just tried to give away my house and stick me in a garage. I haven't been a real part of this family for a very long time. I walked out, closing the door softly behind me, leaving the ruins of their comfortable lie scattered on the dining room floor. I knew this was just the beginning. The storm I had held back for 8 years had finally broken. I drove away from the house with a strange sense of emptiness. There was no triumph, no satisfaction of a battle won. Just a profound, aching sadness. I had finally spoken the truth, a truth I had carried alone for 8 long years, and it had detonated my family. It felt less like a victory and more like amputating a gangrenous limb. Necessary, but horrific. I went to my penthouse, the one my father had so generously promised to Chloe, and the city lights spread out below me like a blanket of scattered diamonds. They usually brought me a sense of peace, of perspective. Tonight, they just made me feel small and isolated. I called Ben. I told them, I said, my voice flat as I sank into a leather chair. And Ben's voice was calm, steady. He was always the anchor in my storm. It went about as well as you'd expect, I sighed, running a hand over my face. Denial, rage, accusations of forgery, claims of insanity. The works. Okay, Ben said, a businesslike tone in his voice. The emotional reaction was inevitable. Now we move to the factual. Phase 2 begins now. I'll have a courier send a certified letter to your father's house in the morning. It will contain a notarized copy of the deed for the main property and a letter from me, as legal counsel for Clearview Holdings, stating the facts of ownership. We need to establish a formal paper trail of communication. No more, he said. She said, good. I said, let's do it. I thought the battle would be fought with lawyers and documents, in the quiet, sterile language of the law. I was wrong. My family, specifically my sister Chloe, decided to open a new front, the court of public opinion. She was about to engage in a scorched earth campaign. The next morning, my phone started buzzing. Then it started vibrating, then ringing. It didn't stop. Texts from cousins, old high school friends, distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. All of them asking if I was okay, what was going on, or worse, accusing me of things I couldn't comprehend. I was confused until someone sent me a screenshot. It was a public post from Chloe's Facebook page. My heart sank as I read it. She had written a masterful piece of fiction, a symphony of manipulation. It was a long, rambling post, accompanied by a carefully selected photo of our parents from their 40th wedding anniversary. They looked frail, distinguished, and vulnerable. I'm heartbroken to have to write this. It began, dripping with false sincerity. But our family is going through an unimaginable crisis. My younger brother, Ethan, after years of emotional distance and jealousy over our close-knit family, has decided to use his financial success as a weapon. He has fabricated some bizarre legal documents and is now trying to evict our elderly parents from the home they have lived in for over 40 years, the home our father built with his bare hands. He is also trying to take the homes of his siblings who have families of their own to support. I remember when we were kids, he would hoard his toys and refuse to share. It seems some things never change. We don't know what has gotten into him, but this act of cold, calculated cruelty has left us all in shock. Please pray for our parents, Richard and Eleanor, as they face the terrifying prospect of homelessness at the hands of their own son. The post was a work of art. The detail about the childhood toys was a particularly vicious touch, a small, unverifiable anecdote to paint me as pathologically selfish. She had painted me as a monster, a cold-hearted tech millionaire exacting some bizarre revenge. She left out the part about the bankruptcy, my secret bailout, the years of my financial support, and the fact that they had just tried to take my house from me. The comments were a tidal wave of sympathy for them and condemnation for me. They poured in by the minute. That's horrible. How can anyone do that to their own parents? You should get a lawyer. Sending love and prayers to Richard and Eleanor. Stay strong. Your brother is disgusting. Money really does corrupt people. He should be ashamed. This is a clear case of elder abuse. You should contact the authorities. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. She had made it public. She had slandered my name and character to hundreds of people, many of whom I knew personally and professionally. It was a declaration of total war. This was her trying to leverage social pressure, to shame me into backing down, to make me the villain so they could remain the victims. I clenched my jaw, a white-hot anger replacing the sadness. They weren't just ungrateful. They were malicious. They were willing to burn my reputation to the ground to maintain their lie. I called Ben again. My voice was shaking with rage. "You're not going to believe this," I said, and I read him the post word for word, including the part about the toys. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Okay," Ben said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger. "This is ugly. This is defamation, pure and simple. This is a deliberate attempt to harm you. This changes the timeline. What do we do?" I asked, my mind racing. "We stick to the plan, but we accelerate it," he said firmly. "They've chosen to fight dirty. That means we have to be ruthlessly clean. Everything by the book. No emotional responses online. Do not engage. Not a single comment. Let your actions speak for you. The certified letter has been sent. The next step is the one you were hoping to avoid. We need to serve them." "Serve them?" "Official notices," Ben clarified. "Not eviction notices yet, but a formal notice to quit for each property. It's a legal document that informs the occupant that the legal owner wishes for them to vacate the premises. It gives them 30 days. It's the first legal step in the official eviction process. It's no longer a request, Ethan. It's a demand. They've made it clear they have no intention of acknowledging your ownership. Now we have to force them to." I thought about Chloe's post, about the lies, about the public humiliation. I thought about my father's roar of rage and my brother's sneer of contempt. My hope for a peaceful resolution, for some flicker of gratitude or remorse, died right then and there. It was a fantasy. They had drawn the battle lines. They thought they could use emotion and public perception to win. They were about to find out that, in the world of property law, facts don't care about your feelings. And I had all the facts on my side. "Do it, Ben," I said, my voice cold and clear as a winter morning. "Serve them all." The days that followed were a masterclass in collective delusion. My family, buoyed by the outpouring of sympathy from Chloe's fabricated sob story, operated as if my revelation and the certified letter from Ben were nothing more than a childish tantrum. They were so secure in their own narrative, the one where they were the righteous victims and I was the unhinged villain, that they couldn't conceive of a world where they weren't in control. They were about to run, full speed, into a series of invisible, unyielding legal and financial walls. The first collision happened to Leo. Convinced he could prove I was a fraud, he drove his Range Rover to his bank, a place where he was used to being treated like a VIP. His plan was simple and, in his mind, absolutely brilliant. He would apply for a home equity line of credit. The bank, in processing the application, would have to pull the official property records. He imagined the loan officer handing him a document with his name on it, a golden ticket he could wave in my face to end this whole misunderstanding. He probably imagined the scene in his head, him triumphantly holding up a piece of paper at the next family dinner, me slinking away in defeat while my father clapped him on the back. He walked into the bank with his signature swagger, all expensive cologne and a firm handshake for the loan officer, a young woman named Brenda. I can only imagine the conversation. He would have been charming, confident, making small talk about the market, bragging about his latest deal. Brenda would have smiled politely, typing his information into her system. Then, she would have typed in the property address. I can picture her smile faltering, her brow furrowing slightly. She would have double-checked the address. Then she would have looked up at Leo, her professional demeanor now tinged with confusion. "I'm sorry, Mr. Maxwell," she would have said, "but we can't proceed with this application." "What? Why not? My credit is excellent," Leo would have boasted, leaning back in his chair. "Run the numbers. You'll see. It's not about your credit, sir. The name on the title for this property isn't yours. It's listed under a corporation, a Clearview Holdings LLC. Leo's confident smirk would have vanished as if wiped clean. "That's a mistake," he'd insist, his voice a little too loud. "A clerical error. My father handled all that paperwork years ago. Run it again." Brenda, maintaining her composure, would have swiveled her screen towards him. "As you can see, sir, according to the official county records, the property was sold in a foreclosure auction in 2008. Clearview Holdings has been the sole registered owner for the past 8 years. We can't offer a line of credit on a property you don't own." The first wall, hard, cold, and digital, he would have argued, demanded to speak to a manager, but the facts were immutable. He left the bank not with a triumphant document, but with a face full of confused fury and the first, terrifying seed of doubt planted in his arrogant mind. The second collision involved my father. His approach was more direct, more befitting a patriarch. He was going to use the main house, his castle, as collateral to secure a massive personal loan. He told the family it was for a new business venture, but I knew the truth. He was trying to build a war chest to finance a legal battle against me, using the very asset that was in dispute. The poetic irony was completely lost on him. He called his longtime banker, a man named George who had managed his finances for 20 years. He probably expected the process to be a formality, a simple matter of signing some papers. But George, a meticulous man nearing retirement, had to do his due diligence. He had to deliver the same bad news. "Richard, I'm afraid there's an issue," George said over the phone, his voice laced with professional regret. "The deed for your property isn't in your name. It was transferred back in 2008. "That's impossible," my father would have bellowed, his voice echoing in his home office. "It's a clerical error. Some idiot at the county office screwed up. You fix it, George." "It's not an error, Richard," George would have replied patiently. "I've pulled the chain of title myself. It's a legally recorded sale to a corporation. I can't approve a loan against an asset you don't legally own. My hands are tied." Wall number 2. The foundation of his world, the belief in his own sovereignty, was cracking. His authority, which had been absolute within the family, meant nothing against the cold, hard text of a property deed. While they were hitting these walls, I was building my own fortress. I met with Ben in his glass-walled office downtown, the city buzzing with commerce below us. He had stacks of documents neatly organized on his massive conference table. "They're starting to figure out they can't bluff their way through this," Ben said, sliding a folder towards me. Leo's failed HELIC application and your father's loan rejection are all over the financial grapevine. Bankers talk. They're realizing the cage is real, and they're the ones inside it. What's their next move? I asked, sipping the coffee his assistant had brought me. They'll get a lawyer, Ben predicted with a sigh. A cheap one, probably a family friend, who will tell them what they want to hear. He'll talk about family rights and verbal agreements and emotional distress. He'll posture and send us a blustering 4-page letter. We will respond with a simple, factual, 1-paragraph statement of ownership. It's all just noise before the main event. He pointed to another stack of papers, each one clipped neatly. These are the notices to quit. I've hired a professional process server. A woman named Maria. She's ex-military, tough as nails, and she does everything by the book. She will deliver a notice to each of the 12 properties. She will get a signature confirming receipt, or she will have a witness and document the refusal on video. It will be legal, official, and undeniable. I looked at the documents, my name appearing nowhere, only the impersonal corporate name of my company. Felt surreal. I was methodically dismantling the world I had secretly saved, using the very tools of law and finance I had used to build it. This is going to be the point of no return, I said, more to myself than to Ben. We passed that point when your sister hit post on Facebook, Ben said grimly, his eyes meeting mine. They made this a war, Ethan. Don't feel guilty for fighting back with the truth. He was right. They had left me no choice. They were living in a fantasy, a house of cards built on my generosity, and a strong gust of wind was coming. The notices were the alarm clock, and it was about to get very, very loud. The notices to quit landed like 12 individual bombshells across the county. Maria, the process server, was as professional and unshakable as Ben had promised. She was met with slammed doors at Chloe's townhouse, a torrent of verbal abuse from Leo, and my mother's tearful pleas at the main house. But she did her job. Every household was officially served, and every interaction was documented. The family's reaction was to escalate. Their new lawyer, a semi-retired cousin of a friend who specialized in slip-and-fall cases, sent Ben a rambling, threatening letter filled with legal-sounding nonsense about moral inheritance, promissory estoppel, and infliction of emotional distress. Ben's response was a single page, citing the property deeds by their official record numbers and politely informing him that any further communication should be about coordinating a move-out date. That's when my father broke. His entire world was built on the foundation of his authority, and that foundation was crumbling. He couldn't bully a legal document. He couldn't intimidate a property deed. He couldn't shout down the law. So he decided to come after me directly, man to man, as he would say. He found the address for my consulting firm online. I don't know what he was expecting. Maybe a small, sad office in a suburban strip mall. A place where he could tower over me, pound his fist on a cheap desk, and reassert his dominance through sheer volume. What he found was a sleek, 3-story glass building in the heart of the city's booming tech district, with my company's logo discreetly etched into the frosted glass of the front doors. A young, professional receptionist in a bustling, modern lobby greeted him. My assistant, Grace, a sharp young woman who managed my chaotic schedule with terrifying efficiency, called me in my office. Mr. Maxwell, there's a man here who says he's your father. He's quite agitated and refusing to state the nature of his business. It's okay, Grace, I said calmly, my heart rate quickening just a bit. Show him to the main conference room. And would you please ask Mr. Harrison if he can join us in 5 minutes? Tell him it's about the final signing. Mr. Harrison was the CEO of a major venture capital firm we were about to close a 9-figure deal with. It was a calculated move, I admit, but I needed an impartial, high-status witness. I needed my father to see me not as his disappointing son who played with computers, but as the world saw me, a successful, respected CEO. When I walked into the conference room, my father was standing in the middle of it, looking completely out of place. His work boots seemed to scuff the polished concrete floor. He was dwarfed by the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. He looked at the long, polished mahogany table, the advanced video conferencing system on the wall, the bustling office full of young, energetic employees visible through the glass walls. The rage on his face was mixed with a new, unsettling emotion, profound confusion. "What is all this?" he demanded, his voice trying to boom but getting lost in the high-ceilinged room. He gestured wildly at everything. "Is this some kind of rental? A facade?" "It's my office, Dad," I said simply, taking a seat at the head of the table, my seat. "Please sit down." He didn't sit. He threw a file onto the table. It was a copy of the deed Ben had sent him, now wrinkled and coffee-stained. "This is a fraud. You forged these documents. I don't know how you did it, what kind of computer tricks you pulled, but you did. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to ruin you. I'll tell everyone what you are." I didn't say anything. I just turned to the massive 80-inch screen on the wall and tapped a button on the table's integrated console. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It wasn't a legal document. It was a professionally designed presentation. The first slide was the sleek logo for Clearview Holdings, LLC. "You're right about one thing, Dad," I said, my voice steady, amplified slightly by the room's acoustics. "You don't know how I did it. So let me show you." For the next 10 minutes, I walked him through the last 8 years of his life from my perspective. With a click of a button, I brought up the original sale documents from 2008, scanned in high resolution. I zoomed in on his own signature on the papers that authorized the short sale to the bank, the very sale that allowed my company to legally purchase the assets. His face went pale as a sheet. Then I moved on. I put up a slide detailing my consulting firm, the list of international clients, names he recognized from the news, the annual revenue, a number with so many zeros he had to read it twice, the organizational chart showing over 100 employees, including VPs of engineering, sales, and marketing. His son, the computer nerd, was running a global operation. But I wasn't done. This was the moment of truth, the main event, the payoff. "The reason I could do all this," I said, my voice dropping, becoming more intimate, "is because I am very, very good at managing money and risk, something you, unfortunately, were not. I don't just know about my own finances, Dad. For my own protection, I've made it my business to know about yours." The next slide appeared on the screen. It was titled Family Financial Snapshot, a study in leverage and liability. It listed in stark, undeniable bullet points their secret debts. Leo Maxwell, $85,000 in high-interest credit card debt across 6 cards. An auto loan on the Range Rover that was double the car's actual market value. Chloe Maxwell Jenkins, a failing online boutique that had lost money for 3 straight years, propped up by high-interest personal loans co-signed by her husband. And then his Richard and Eleanor Maxwell, $170,000 in unsecured personal loans from 5 different lenders, taken out over the last 5 years to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford, to pay for the lavish vacations, the country club membership. My father stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. The color had completely drained from his face. This was his deepest, most shameful secret, the reality behind the facade of the proud patriarch. And I had just laid it bare under the harsh, fluorescent lights of a corporate conference room. It was brutal, but it was the truth. How could you know this?" he whispered, his voice cracking. He finally sank into one of the expensive leather chairs, looking like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. "Because the houses you were using as perceived collateral for some of these loans are mine," I said quietly. "The banks do their research when a loan defaults, and so do I. I knew you were drowning. I kept waiting for you to ask for help, to treat me like a son, instead of a disappointment or an afterthought. But you never did. Instead, you decided to steal from me." He had no more anger, no more bluster, just the crushing, suffocating weight of the truth. Just then, the conference room door opened. A man in a sharp, tailored suit walked in, exuding an aura of power and confidence. It was Mr. Harrison. "Ethan, sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice warm and respectful. "Just wanted to confirm our lunch meeting to sign the final papers on that $30 million funding round. The board is ecstatic." He glanced at my father, who looked utterly broken, a relic from a bygone era. "Everything okay?" Mr. Harrison asked me, his gaze shifting between us. I stood up and shook his hand, stepping back into my world, the world I had built. "Everything is perfectly fine, Robert. This is my father, Richard. We were just finishing up a family business meeting." Mr. Harrison nodded politely at my father, who could barely meet his gaze. The CEO of a major firm had just called me by my first name, treated me as an equal, a peer, and casually mentioned a deal that was more money than my father had seen in his entire life. In that single moment, the power dynamic of our entire relationship, of my entire life, was irrevocably shattered and remade. I was no longer just his son. I was an entity he could not comprehend, a force he could not control. He had come to my office to destroy me. He left it completely and utterly defeated, the ghost of a man who had just seen the real foundation of his world, and realized it had nothing to do with him. This was the moment that changed everything, when I finally took back control of my life. Thank you for sticking with me this far, you're amazing. Please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below, so I know you've been on this journey with me. It doesn't just help more people find this story. It lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. After the disastrous meeting in my office, my father didn't go home and rally the troops for another fight. He went home and surrendered. The fight had been drained out of him, replaced by the hollow shock of reality. The truth was out, not just about the property ownership, but about the precarious financial fantasy they had all been living in. The blustering lawyer they had hired was dismissed with a short phone call. There were no more angry texts, no more slanderous social media posts. There was only a heavy, deafening silence, the kind that follows a massive explosion. The 30-day deadline on the notices to quit was approaching. I told Ben to hold off on filing the official unlawful detainer, the formal eviction papers, with the court. It was a final, small act of grace. I didn't want the ultimate humiliation for them. Sheriff's deputies escorting my parents, my brother's children, out of their homes. But I made it clear through Ben that the deadline was firm. They had to be out. There were no more extensions. And so the great dismantling began. Moving trucks, the very ones they had once cheerfully planned to use to move Leo into my mansion, started appearing on their streets like hearses. But instead of carrying beautiful furniture to bigger, grander homes, they were being loaded with the contents of lives that were about to shrink dramatically. My parents were the first to go. The sprawling house my father had built, the symbol of his entire identity, was emptied room by room. I drove by one evening and saw the flicker of a single bare bulb in the living room, illuminating the ghosts of memories. They found a 3-bedroom rental in a town 30 miles away, a place with vinyl siding and a small, tidy lawn. The rent was $2,800 a month, a figure that I knew would consume the entirety of their Social Security income and the small pension my father had. The grand dining table, the site of my public execution, was sold in an estate sale for pennies on the dollar. It wouldn't fit in their new life. Leo and Sophia were next. The fallout for them was brutal. They had to sell the Range Rover at a massive loss just to cover their moving costs and pay the first and last month's rent on a small apartment in a less fashionable part of town. Their 4 children, used to having their own rooms and a sprawling backyard, would now have to share bedrooms. The life of lavish parties, expensive vacations, and designer clothes was over. They were facing a mountain of debt with no assets to hide behind. The word divorce started being whispered among relatives. The financial stress was a cancer on their already superficial marriage, and without the grand house to distract them, they were forced to look at the emptiness between them. Chloe and Daniel left their trendy townhouse and, in the ultimate humiliation for Chloe, moved into her in-laws' basement. Her online boutique, without the safety net of free housing and a constant stream of loans, collapsed within a week. The public shame of her failed venture, combined with the humiliation of her failed social media attack on me, was absolute. She deactivated her Facebook account and disappeared from view. 3 weeks after the deadline, I went to the main house. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. It was just a house, a collection of wood, glass, and stone. All the emotional weight, all the history, all the resentment, that was something we had brought inside. It wasn't in the walls. I went to Chloe's old townhouse before the new tenants moved in. In the back of a closet, left behind, was a small, framed photo of the three of us as kids at the lake cabin, smiling years before money and resentment had poisoned everything. Seeing it didn't make me angry. It just made me sad for what we had lost, and what could never be regained. A few days later, my mother called me. Her number flashed on my screen, and I hesitated for a long moment before answering. I expected a final plea, another attempt at emotional manipulation, a guilt trip. But her voice was different. It was small, tired, stripped of its usual melodic authority. "The new place is smaller," she said, without any preamble. "I know," I replied, my own voice neutral. There was a long pause. I could hear a television playing in the background. "Your father, he doesn't talk much anymore. He just sits in his chair and looks out the window. He sold all his tools. Said he wouldn't need them anymore." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. I had wanted accountability, not annihilation. "Are you?" she asked, and for a second, I heard a flash of the old bitterness, the sharp edge of her resentment. "Are you happy now, Ethan? You've won. You have all your houses back. Was it worth it?" "This was never about the houses, Mom," I said, my voice soft but firm, refusing to take the bait. "You know that. This was about respect. The respect you never gave me, that you gave so freely to Leo. You valued his image over my substance. You celebrated his debts and dismissed my assets. Respect." She repeated the word as if it were from a foreign language. "We're your family. Love should be enough. You should have just kept helping us quietly." "Love isn't ownership, Mom," I said, a wave of clarity washing over me. "And it isn't a blank check for disrespect. I love you. I know it's hard to believe now, but I've always loved all of you. That's why I did what I did 8 years ago. But I can't let that love be a reason to let you destroy me. I have to love myself, too. That's the part one forgot for a very long time." She started to cry then, a quiet, weary weeping. It wasn't the performative tears from the family meeting. It was the sound of genuine, heartbreaking loss. She had lost her home, her status, her comfortable life. But I think in that moment, she finally realized she had lost something far more valuable. She had lost the son she never knew she had, all because she refused to see him. We ended the call without saying goodbye. There was nothing left to say. The fallout was complete. The storm had passed, leaving a landscape of wreckage behind, and I was left standing in the middle of it, alone, wondering if anything could ever be rebuilt from such desolate rubble. 6 months passed. 6 months of silence, of space, of a strange and unfamiliar peace that slowly settled over my life. My world, for the first time, was completely my own, unburdened by the secret weight of my family's expectations and financial needs. The deal with Mr. Harrison's firm went through, injecting a massive amount of capital into my company. We were expanding, hiring the brightest minds, creating technology that I was genuinely passionate about. I even expanded my personal real estate portfolio, acquiring 2 more commercial properties, bringing my total to 14. The empire was growing, but this time it was growing in the sunlight. There were no secrets, no hidden burdens. It was clean. I had the main house professionally cleaned and staged. I considered selling it to wash my hands of the memories, but it felt like letting them win, letting them tarnish something beautiful. Instead, I rented it out to a family with 3 young children, a doctor and a professor. Seeing them play in the yard, hearing their laughter echo in the halls where there had only been tense silence, felt right. It was just a house, after all. My mistake had been letting my family turn it into a symbol of everything else. My parents settled into their new, smaller life. Ben, who still managed the LLC, informed me that their rent was paid on time electronically on the 1st of every month. No drama, no fuss. They were living within their means for the first time in decades. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, Grace buzzed my office. "Ethan, your brother Leo is in the lobby. He says he doesn't have an appointment, but he's asking if you'll see him. My first instinct was a cold, hard no, a reflex action built on years of disappointment. But curiosity, and perhaps a faint, lingering ember of hope I thought had long been extinguished, made me change my mind. "Send him up," I said. The Leo who walked into my office was not the same man I'd last seen in that fateful dining room. The designer suit was gone, replaced by a simple, clean polo shirt and jeans. The expensive watch was missing from his wrist. He wasn't swaggering. He was hesitant, his shoulders slumped, his eyes carrying the weariness of a man who had been through a war and lost. He looked thinner, tired, but his eyes were clearer than I had ever seen them. "Ethan," he said, his voice quiet, almost raspy. "Thanks for seeing me." "Leo," I nodded, gesturing to one of the chairs opposite my desk. "What can I do for you?" He sat down but didn't seem to know what to do with his hands, clasping and unclasping them in his lap. I'm not here to ask for anything," he started, stumbling over the words. "No money, no favors, nothing. I needed to say something. To you. Face to face." He took a deep breath, like a diver preparing to plunge into icy water. "I'm sorry," he said. The words came out raw, unpracticed, stripped of his usual smooth charm. "I am so sorry. For everything. For how I treated you my whole life. For laughing at your computer stuff. For being so damn arrogant and entitled. And for that day, for being ready to take your house, your home, without a second thought. God, I was a monster." I just listened, my expression unreadable, giving him the space to say what he came to say. "You know," he continued, a humorless, self-deprecating smile playing on his lips, "losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to me. Sophia and we almost got a divorce. The financial stress was brutal, and we had nothing else to our marriage. But with nothing left to lose, we started talking. Really talking. For the first time. We went to counseling. We sold her car, we cut up the credit cards. I got a real job, not sales. I'm a project manager for a small construction company. It doesn't pay much, not yet, but it's honest work. I come home tired and dirty, but it feels real. It feels like I'm building something, instead of just pretending." He looked me straight in the eye, and for the first time I didn't see jealousy or contempt. I saw a flicker of humility. "We live in a 2-bedroom apartment. The kids share a room. They complain, but they're learning to get along. We're on a strict budget for the first time in our lives. We're actually saving money for their college fund instead of just assuming it will magically appear. And you know what? We're happier. It's insane, but we are. I was so jealous of you, Ethan. I was jealous of your brains, jealous that you made it on your own without having to play Dad's game of appearances. And instead of admiring you, I belittled you because it made me feel better about myself. That's on me. I wanted you to hear it from me." He stood up, looking like a massive weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "That's all. I'll go." "Leo, wait," I said, my voice surprising me with its softness. He turned at the door. "Thank you for telling me that," I said, and I meant it. It was the first crack of light in the thick, granite wall that had stood between us for our entire lives. It wasn't a reunion, it wasn't a magical fix, but it was a start. It was real. A month later, another surprise. A call from my father. I almost didn't answer, but some instinct told me to. "Ethan," he said. His voice was different. The boom was gone. It was just the voice of an old man, hesitant and frail. "Hi, Dad. Your mother and I, we're having a small dinner on Sunday. For your mother's birthday. Just us. We were wondering if you would come." I was stunned into silence. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a summons. It was an invitation. A question. In my entire life, my father had never invited me to anything. He had informed me of my required presence. "Why?" I asked, my voice betraying my suspicion. It was the only word I could manage. There was a long pause on his end, and I heard him take a shaky breath. "Because," he said, and his voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't place, an emotion I had never heard from him before. Because your Uncle David told me something after you saw him last. He said he tried to tell me years ago, after you sold your first company. He said, "Richard, that boy is a genius. You should be listening to him, not lecturing him." And I was too damn proud to listen. Your mother, too. She told me I was wrong, that we should have been proud. I spent so long trying to make you a reflection of me, or a disappointment for not being like Leo, that I never saw who you actually were. You built something incredible, son. An empire. I'm sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I tried to take it. It wasn't a perfect apology. It was clumsy and self-serving in its own way. But coming from him, it was a seismic shift. It was an admission. It was the first time he had ever called me son, and made it sound like a term of respect, not just a biological fact. The foundation wasn't just being rebuilt. It was being laid for the very first time. I did go to that dinner. It was at their small rental house. The air was thick with the smell of roast chicken and an unspoken history of pain. It was awkward. The conversation was stilted at first, filled with the ghosts of things we couldn't say. We didn't talk about the houses or the money or the eviction notices. We talked about the weather, about my work, about their new, quiet neighborhood. My mother served the meal on plates that didn't match, a small detail that spoke volumes about the life they had lost. But something was different. When I talked about my company's new project, my father listened. He put down his fork, looked at me, and asked intelligent questions. My mother, for the first time, didn't refer to my job as computer stuff. She asked about my employees, about whether I was taking care of myself. It was a small change, a tiny shift in vocabulary and focus, but it meant everything. There was a flicker of genuine interest, of respect. As I drove home that night, the city lights streaking past my window, I realized the truth. My empire wasn't the 14 properties listed under Clearview Holdings. It wasn't the impressive balance sheet of my company or the number in my bank account. My real empire, the one I had been fighting for all along, was the right to be myself. The right to exist on my own terms. The right to be respected for who I am, not for what I could silently provide. Establishing those boundaries was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It felt like an act of destruction, of tearing everything down to the studs. Cost me my family as I knew it. But sometimes, a structure is so rotted and compromised from the inside that you can't fix it. You have to demolish it and build something new on a stronger, more honest foundation. Our family will never be what it was. The scars are there, a permanent reminder of the hurt we caused each other. But what we're building now is more honest. It's fragile, yes, and tentative, but it's real. It's built not on secrets and obligations and unspoken resentments, but on the hard-won, long-overdue foundation of respect. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own peace? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.